Yep, excellent. The inquiry is resumed. Mr. Katkowski, can we see if your microphone's working?
Yes, thank you very much indeed, sir. I hope that's working. Good, thank you. Let's move on.
I'm here.
And in your statement, as you know, the next point, we'll move away from the tool building element now. We'll move on to the other points that you've raised, and we'll deal with them, I hope, much more briefly. So can we start with the next subject that you've raised, density?
Yes.
Density guidelines, etc., etc. And it's a very, very simple point. I mean, are you aware that the density guidelines in the London plan are simply that? They're guidelines. They are not ceilings. They're not maxima that can't be exceeded. In fact, over half of development in London since these guidelines were set out exceed the maxima, exceed the guidelines set out in the plan. Were you aware of that?
Could you refer me to the relevant part of the London plan? Which
No, I'm just asking you a general question.
Well, as I made clear at the beginning, I'm not a lawyer and I'm not a technical planning expert, so I can't express an opinion on that, I'm afraid.
Right, but have you treated them as if they are ceilings? Because you've certainly deployed the argument that because we are at X and X is higher than Y, which is set out in these guidelines, that therefore that's a reason for refusal. So have you understood these guidelines as if they set some form of ceilings, caps, maxima for density? That's what I'm asking you. Is that your understanding of what you've actually spoken about?
Well, I've simply drawn attention to the fact that the numbers in the London plan, the 700 habitable rooms per hectare for sites of this nature, are exceeded by a factor of 50% on the island site. The precise legal implication of that, I would not wish to venture an opinion on because I'm not a lawyer.
Well, it's not
but it would
really,
be helpful, given you've raised the point, it'd be helpful if you could point us to the part of the London
really
plan that makes that clear.
It's not really a legal point at all. And you'll know that the plan
well,
maker...
Mr. Katkowski, in fairness, can we go to the part of the London plan, please?
Right, we can indeed.
I'm not in favour of prolonging this either.
No,
that's
fine. That's absolutely fine. Thank you very much indeed. So in the London plan, just forgive me for one moment, I'll just give you the page number. Well, the table that you've referred to, I mean, obviously I'm working off the back of your statement. So your statement is at the bottom of the 5th page of your statement where you deal with density. As I understand it, the table you refer to, you say it's table 3.2, that's on page 101 of the London plan.
Yes. Well, I think if we perhaps go to the previous page, that may help us.
Just give me one moment.
All right.
I was going to say that's the table, and on the previous page, at page 100, we find the policy itself is set out, policy 3.4, optimising housing potential.
Indeed.
And we're told, taking into account local context and character, design principles in Chapter 7, public transport capacity, development should optimise housing output for different types of location within the relevant density range shown in table 3.2. Yes. And if you compromise this policy, you should be resisted. This is not a policy that sets the density matrix as if they are caps or ceilings on...
Well, I'm afraid I rather disagree.
Right.
I mean, I hesitate to disagree with the interpretation of the country's leading planning QC, but I do think
I'll put that on my webpage, then thanks very much.
If there's a QC equivalent of TripAdvisor, I'll go on it later. But I think policy 3.4 is actually very clear. It says the last sentence is categoric. So I'm on policy 3.4. Policy 3.4 A on page 100. Yeah. The last sentence in the pink shading says development proposals which compromise this policy, that is to say are outside the range, should be resisted. So the policy upon which you seek to rely is very clear. excessive density should be resisted. So the London plan is giving the inspector quite a clear instruction that he should, I hadn't noticed that before, so I'm grateful for you pointing it out. The inspector has been given a clear instruction by the London plan to resist this proposal on grounds of density. And the word resist is quite a strong word, I would suggest.
Just read on in the text underneath 3.28. A rigorous appreciation of housing density is crucial to realising the optimum potential of sites, but it is only the start of planning housing development, not the end. It is not appropriate to apply Table 3.2 mechanistically. Its density ranges for particular types of location are broad, enabling account to be taken of other factors, etc., relevant to optimising potential. So, anyway, I've put my understanding of it to you, and I think you're saying you disagree with that. Let's move on to my next point in relation to density, which is simply this.
Are you done with your answer on that point?
Yeah, and I would simply reiterate the fact the use of the word resisted is very strong, and the fact it's exceeded by 50%, it's not a sort of small matter, it is massively
exceeded. We've got all of that.
Okay, but nothing further, no.
Yeah, thank you very much. And what I was going to move on to say is that the custodian of the London plan, the mayor, has actually analysed all of this. I corrected you on your use of the word rubber stamp earlier on. You'll be aware, I hope, that there's a two-stage process by the mayor, the GLA, when they consider planning applications. There's a stage 1 report and a stage 2 report. And density, amongst other matters, is looked at. And the mayor, the GLA, have signed off and, in fact, quote-unquote, strongly support this application. So if there was an issue with the London plan's density guidelines, then one would have expected the mayor to raise it. Quite the opposite. The mayor has actually strongly supported these proposals. Do you see my point?
Well, look, I mean...
Do you see my point?
I fully understand that the Mayor of London, Sadiq Khan, has approved this proposal. I strongly disagree with his decision. The fact that his own density guidelines are exceeded, however...
Can we just go back to my point?
Hang on, is not a matter of opinion, it is a matter of fact.
No, I'm not going to hang on. Just let's go back to my question, if you don't mind. The custodian of the London plan, the maker of the London plan, the mayor, the GLA, have looked at this in their stage 1 and stage 2 detailed reports on this application and have come out in strong support of the application. So the point I was putting to you is that if these guidelines were to be read in the way that you suggest, one would expect the mayor to raise this point. He hasn't. Quite the opposite. He strongly supported the proposal. Do you see? That's the point.
The mayor has chosen, I think wrongly, to disregard the guidelines in the London plan. A London plan, of course, published by his predecessor, Boris Johnson, and one of the reasons to have a call in and to have an independent planning inspector make an adjudication is so that errors like this can be corrected. So I think Sadiq Khan was wholly wrong to ignore the London plan, and I hope the planning inspector corrects his manifest error.
No, forgive me, it's not that the mayor has ignored the London plan, it's that the mayor and his advisors have looked at the London plan and do not consider the London plan in relation to density to be setting out ceilings. They've actually strongly supported the notion of a development which here in relation to this point is higher than, greater than that density. Do you see?
They've taken a view on this which I do not think is merited by the facts of the case. I think they're just plain wrong, and I'm sure they did it knowingly. We've already established that development proposals that compromise this policy should be resisted. It's a matter of plain fact in the council's own report that density is exceeded on the island side by 50%. So Sadiq Khan, either knowingly or unknowingly, chose to breach London plan guidelines. He was wrong to do that, and this inquiry can correct it.
Are you aware of, as I put you in one of my earlier questions, I'll just put it as a separate point now, are you aware of the fact, and it is a fact, that since the London plan originally published these density guidelines, in fact in one of the earlier manifestations of the London plan, half of all developments approved in London since then have exceeded the density guidelines, and a quarter of the 100%, a quarter of applications approved have been more than double the density guidelines. Were you aware of that?
I wasn't aware of those figures, but it doesn't change my view. I mean, you're essentially advancing an argument that sort of, if a rule or a law has been broken once or twice or even many times, it doesn't matter if it's broken again. Well, I'm afraid, as someone who believes in the rule of law and believes in the sanctity of planning policy, I don't share your slightly casual view of the fact that...
I have that point.
Yes.
Yes, I mean...
And I won't mischaracterise the answers you've given me when I close my case. Try not to mischaracterise my point. I'm not saying if a law's broken once, you can break it lots of times. That's not my point. My point is you're misreading these as if they're some sort of maximum.
I have the point. Shall we move on? Because I know neither of you want to spend longer.
We would indeed. Right, turn the page. Something completely different now. Someone once said, the view from Farthing Downs.
Yes.
All right. Now, what I want you to do here, and if you're doing this electronically, that's fine. But you'll know that you've produced a snapshot image, if you like, from Farthing Downs, and you've set out where, and you said you don't claim to have done this scientifically, where you think the tower might be in that.
I would stress I have not done it scientifically, and I'm not a surveyor, so I present it with those very important health warnings.
Absolutely, they are indeed very important health warnings. Now, it has been done scientifically, though, on behalf of the applicants, and you'll need for this core document 1.27, which is the Townscape and Visual Assessment. Now, probably, is that one you'll need to use
Which tab number is it?
Forgive me, it's in volume 2,
Yep.
in volume 2, and
Tab
it's
number?
27.
I do have that in front of me, yes.
Yes. They're unwieldy documents,
Yes.
and you need first of all to go to page 48 of that document, which is a map.
Yes, I'm looking at page 48.
And on that map, you'll see, do you see number 15?
Yes, I see.
At the bottom. That's the, I think it's called the cairn, that's the viewpoint, the platform, if you like, on Farthing Downs.
By the number 15, there's a dot and there's an arrow.
Yes.
Is the viewpoint they're indicating the sort of tip of the arrow?
No. The dot is where if you read this document, and it's a long document, you'll find
I see.
marked there. That's a direction of view from which various photographs have been taken.
Yes.
And the exact coordinates are set out in this document.
Just one quick point of clarification. I believe the cairn is at or close to the high point.
Yes.
I'm sure you've been there, which is 147 metres. My analysis was based...
It's lower down.
It was lower down.
No,
it was the 135 metre contour. So and because it's quite gradually sloping, that's quite a long way in distance terms.
Let's just start with the accurate work that's been done, and I'll then come to your image. All right?
Okay.
So with that in mind, as to the viewpoint that has been assessed, all in agreement with the council, by the way, if you go to this same document at page 38 and facing page 39, 38 and facing page 39, you'll see on page 38 is the view without our proposed development in it from that coordinate. And on the right-hand side of the page, page 39, you can see we've had to mark it in grey simply to enable one to understand where our development would be, but it doesn't break the tree or skyline at all, as shown in this accurate image. You wouldn't actually see it like this at all, because in fact it's been superimposed on some trees, but that's just to show that its location would not breach the skyline, the tree line.
That's
at all.
right. I agree that viewed from the highest point of Farthing Down, which is in the vicinity of the cairn at 147 metres, I agree that it doesn't breach the tree line. And that's, of course, why my analysis was based on the 135 metre contour.
Well, and what I was going to say in relation to that is that we have tried to replicate the work that you did. I mean, as you rightly say, it's, you haven't done it in a scientific way, etc., etc. And I think the best that we can do is, our understanding is that our tower would never breach the skyline from any point on Farthing Down. So what I'm going to ask you to do is, we're going to be circulating an itinerary, if you like, for the inspector to go on various site visits and tours. We're going to share that, obviously, with the residents' associations. And what I'd like you to do in due course is, you might even be able to do it today before you go, is just mark on a map where you would like the inspector to particularly view from. And obviously we can then try to better understand your point.
Well, I would simply say that if you can using an OS 1 to 25,000 scale map, which you can look on online nowadays, just look at the point at which the 135 contour intersects Ditches Lane. That's the point I used.
Okay, fine. Well, we'll put that on a map then. Someone behind me has heard that. We'll put that on a map, and if we've got it wrong, then someone can tell us we've got it wrong. But anyway, our understanding is that our tower will never breach the skyline, the tree line, from anywhere on the down. And as you drop down the hill, that would be the case. That's our understanding. So we can try our best to test this once we better understand your viewpoint. Now, the next thing that I just wanted to draw to your attention is, what is this panorama all about? And we're going to need to look at another document to get to the bottom of that. Just bear with me for one moment.
Are we turning to the 2006 UDP?
No, I'm not turning to the UDP. More recently, there's been a study in connection with the emerging local plan, which is going to replace the UDP on this point, as to why certain views are protected in planning policies in Croydon. Yep. And you might not have seen this document. It's in our folders at volume 7. It's core document 12.5.
What is it?
And if you give me one moment, I'll turn to the front cover and I shall read out its very long title. It's Croydon Local Plan Evidence-Based Assessment of Landmarks, Panoramas and Views for Inclusion in CLP 1.1. That's, the title was even longer than that, believe it or not, but that's the document.
Inclusion. Okay, so this is, just to be clear, this is a document which is emerging but hasn't yet been adopted. And of course, the views policy I'm referring to is the 2006 UDP, which is still in force.
Yes, but, or not quite. The position is that in the modifications to that the council has decided to make to its CLP1 plan, so that, as you know, has a designation CLP 1.1. Don't blame me for these clunky designations. That's what they're called. CLP 1.1. In the changed version of the local plan, the council will be replacing the UDP policy on panoramas, etc., with a new policy.
Yes.
It was similar. It would still protect the view from Farthing Down, so it's still going to protect that view. But as part of that process, they've gone and studied why the council thinks certain views should be protected.
Yes.
Okay? And the document I'm asking you to be given, and you are very helpfully being given now, is that document.
Yeah.
All right? So if you've got the front cover there, the title, rather tells you what it's all about, obviously.
Got it.
Assessment of.
Yep.
And just so you can get your bearings, within this document, just to get the headings that we need, if you could go in it, it's very unwieldy, to page 24. Page 24. It's just here, I just want the headings, you to bear in mind the headings. So if we work from the left of the page, we're told the first column is the name, location, places, description of what can be seen, detail, and this is what I want you to keep in mind, this penultimate column, detail on what elements of this panorama are considered valuable and protectable. All right? Detail of what elements in the panorama are considered valuable and protectable. And then on the right-hand side, last column, what kind of development would be intrusive, and assessment methodology to consider how a panorama may be affected. So it's a penultimate and the last column. And when I see
where you're heading.
Yeah, I know, because I'm sure you can, because nothing subtle in what I do, Mr. Philp. So if we go to the next page, page 25.
I might say the same.
If we go to page 25, do you see there, it's going to be renumbered as CP4, and that's the panorama from Farthing Downs. I don't know how good the quality of your image is in that thumbnail image, but that's the view from the Downs, do you see? Okay? And in the penultimate column, what is said to be protectable in that view is very imaginatively named Number 1 Croydon. Number 1 Croydon, do you see?
Yes, I do see.
Number 1 Croydon. And you'll know as a local MP, I hope, that Number 1 Croydon, you're too young for this, but for oldies like me, is a threepenny bit-shaped building by East Croydon Station.
We call it the 50p building.
For younger people like you, it's the 50p building by East Croydon Station. So that's the building which is said to be protectable in this view. And on the right-hand side of the page, we're told development that obscures the view of the landmark Number 1 Croydon. All right, that's what apparently is seen to be what the council's aiming at with this panorama. Do you see?
I do.
Yeah. Now, I'm just going to have a photograph put in front of you, because on none of the images that we've got in front of the inquiry have any demarcations of what you can see in this panorama being picked out. So I'm just going to have this. Yeah. It's the same image as we were looking at in our in our document just now, and it simply has some arrows on it. And if you can see number 1 Croydon, obviously when you're there, you can see it subject to the trees.
Well, they're trying to protect a view of a building you can't see anyway. You can hardly see it, can you?
For housekeeping, I'll call this document 6.
Document 6, thank you very much indeed. Depending on, I mean, obviously when you're there, the position is, you know, you go and see with your own eyes, and the inspector would do that. But do you see, just working across, you can see here, for those who aren't as familiar with Farthing Downs as others, the newer development in Croydon, Saffron Square, you can see that. You can see to the left-hand side the city cluster, that's the City of London, Canary Wharf, and then number 1 Croydon there. Obviously in this image it's indistinct, but that's just because of the quality of the reproduction. It's just a, you know, not a particularly brilliant copy.
Are you saying we can't rely on this as a piece of accurate evidence?
No, not quite. The point I'm making is that what's said to be protectable in this view is number 1 Croydon. And as you can see, because our building doesn't break the tree line or the skyline, then it's not going to impinge on that view. That's the point. Do you see?
I understand the point.
Yeah, good.
I would make 2 points in reply.
Good.
One is that were you to repeat this analysis from the 135 metre contour, you might find that actually the building does obscure it, but that's by the main point, however, is that the analysis you've just presented, as you, to be fair, made clear, relies on the consideration of panoramas in the emerging Croydon plan, which has not yet been adopted, the same emerging plan that talks about the potential for up to 16 stories. It hasn't been adopted. The document which is in force, and the document which I refer to in my submission, is the UDP from 2006.
I know you do, yes.
And policy UD11 in the UDP from 2006, on page 27, refer the impact which that refer, and this is the plan that is in force today, the plan we must principally refer to, that says we shouldn't build buildings that have, and I'm quoting, an adverse impact. So the test laid out in the UDP isn't anything to do with number 1 Croydon, as per the new plan, is does it have any adverse effect? And the point I was making earlier, and would make again, is that viewed from the 135 metre contour, it would have an adverse effect, thereby breaching UD11 of the existing plan. I'm prepared to accept, once you've done the 135 analysis, that it may well not obscure number 1 Croydon. Although, of course, because you haven't done the analysis from the 135 contour, I couldn't say definitively. Sure.
Okay, let's take a step back. Thanks for that. Let's take a step back. First of all, obviously the council themselves can, I hope, will give evidence about the timetable that they have for the adoption of their new plans. My understanding is that the likelihood is that the new plans will be adopted well before the Secretary of State makes this decision, but I'm relying there on others. And
well, I would just add a health warning that Croydon Council's ability to meet time deadlines is notoriously unreliable, and were you to rely on them telling you when something's going to happen, you could be sorely disappointed.
I don't need to rely on anything at all, because the proof of the pudding would be in the eating. When the Secretary of State makes this decision, you either have adopted plans or you won't. And, you know, I'm more than happy to leave it on that basis. I don't need to speculate, because the Secretary of State will know. All right? And if by that time the new plans are in place and the UDP policy you rely on will have fallen off the table, so to speak, because the new plans
will supersede it.
Absolutely.
I understand.
Thank you. Good. And then the next point to go back to you on is that the point you've made about if you drop down to a lower contour, etc., that depends on the notion that the taller element of our proposals would be not only visible but intrusive from that lower viewpoint. And as far as we're concerned, it won't even be seen above the tree and skyline at the lower points. Do you see?
I do. Well, I mean, my submission is that there's a good 30 metres, the sort of top chunk of the tower, top 25 metres, will be visible, and that my submission is that does constitute an adverse impact. That is, of course, a matter of opinion, which the inspector will have to adjudicate.
Yeah, of course it is. Good. Jolly good. And can we move on now to, we're almost there, this is the penultimate point you make, flood risk not mitigated. And you very fairly said earlier on you're not an expert in these matters, although you did say that you found our flood risk assessment contained...
Not often you'll find a Member of Parliament admitting to that.
Years ago, I cross-examined a budding MP called Theresa May. Whatever happened to her? Strong and stable.
In government.
I won't bait you too much more. You said that you found our flood risk assessment contained airy dismissals which were wholly unconvincing. Now, just help me with this. You're aware of the fact you're obviously aware of the fact we have done flood risk assessments.
Yeah.
But I hope you're aware of the fact that independent scrutiny has been given to those flood risk assessments by the relevant bodies. So that's the Environment Agency, the local lead flood authority,
yeah,
and Thames Water.
Yeah.
And they have all come back with no objection to the development on flood risk or any similar grounds, and have simply recommended various conditions in, one might say, the normal way. So now were you aware of that? So you're not an expert. I'm not an expert in flooding either. But yes, the expert bodies have looked at the reports, yes, and have signed them off. Do you see?
Yes. Well, you've asked me what I'm aware of, so let me. For
clarity. Are you aware of that, first of all? I haven't asked you what you're aware of in some generic sense, because I'm sure you're aware of lots of things. But in relation to
I'm aware of it, and I have it in front of me.
In relation to the experts having looked at our work and having signed it off independently and recommended conditions, are you aware of the consultation responses from the Environment Agency, the local lead flood authority, yep, and Thames Water?
So let me tell you what expert reports I'm aware of and have considered.
No. Can you just first of all confirm that those...
Yes, I'm aware of it. Yes,
right.
I'm aware of it.
Thank you. Good. Carry on.
So in addition to the flood report or flood risk assessment done for this application to which you refer, I'm also aware of and would welcome cross-examination on Croydon's flood investigation report of the 24th of August 2015, which contradicts the flood risk assessment. It shows the site as being a high area of flood risk. And I'm also aware of the strategic flood risk assessment that finds Purley Cross a significant flood risk area. So I'm aware of all three of those documents. And I'm also aware that Croydon Council's separate report, unrelated to the planning application, and the strategic flood risk assessment contradict the flood risk assessment that accompanied this planning application. I'm aware of all of those things.
I suspect that's because you're misreading the documents, but in terms of the chronology of all of this, when I asked you whether you were aware of various responses, one of them is from the lead local flood authority, and you said you were aware of that. Now that response, it's in the papers, is dated the 14th of November 2016, and the local lead is Croydon. Mm-hmm. In other words, it post-dates that report that you've got your hand on there. Do you see?
Yes, I do.
Yes. So would you accept that you, as you quite rightly say, commendably fair, you're not an expert in this subject, would you accept that those who are both independent and expert do not see any of the problems that you have drawn attention to in these proposals? Would you accept that?
Not wholly. There are three pertinent documents. The flood risk assessment accompanying the application, which I fully accept. Well, I mean, it says that...
Just listen to my question, sorry, before you go off on a tangent. You're not an expert. My question was, do you accept that those who are expert and independent, that's the Environment Agency, the lead local flood authority, and Thames Water, independent bodies, expert bodies, have looked at our work, signed it off, and recommended conditions be imposed on the planning permission? So the experts, if you like, independent experts, have a wholly different view to yours. Do you accept that?
Well, I think
do you accept that?
Not in the terms you've laid out.
What's wrong with what I've put to you?
Because what's wrong with it is that you are picking one expert opinion.
No, I've given you three.
Let me rephrase that. You're picking the collection of expert opinions expressed via the planning application, and your representation of that collection of expert opinions in relation to the planning application is correct. I accept it. However, you have understandably disregarded other expert opinions that have been expressed, including by Croydon Council, albeit a year before, including the strategic flood risk assessment, and including...
Mr. Philp, I'm going to interrupt you. I'm not ignoring those documents. The point I'm putting to you is that those documents are not documents which are commenting on the planning application and the planning application's implications for flooding. In fact, the work shows that our proposals would improve the local situation rather than harm it. That view has been accepted by, and the conditions have been recommended, by the relevant authorities. That's what I'm putting. I'm not ignoring anything at all. The documents which relate to this planning application are unanimous on the expert side of the equation in signing off our work and recommending conditions.
Well, I accept that. I accept that because it is manifestly true.
Good.
However, I would also point out that some of the fact base which they use, for example, the map on page 4, figure 3, section 4, 4.1 of the flood risk assessment, illustrating where the flood risk arises, is different to the equivalent map produced by Croydon Council. So I'm just pointing out. So I fully accept that the application documents support the flood position. I was pointing out there are other expert documents, including one produced by Croydon Council, that have a different analysis of where the flood risk is.
That document that you keep referring to predates Croydon, who are the lead local flood authority, setting out their detailed conclusions on the 14th of November 2016.
It's just that they've changed their mind between 2015 and 2016.
No. It's the exact opposite of the point I'm making to you. Taking into account Croydon's own publications, Croydon has said what they've said in November 2016. That's my point. Because it's the last, chronologically, the last statement by Croydon on this is some time after, nearly a year after, or a year or more after that document.
Well, I understand that, and I'm simply pointing out that it's their sign-off, Croydon Council's sign-off, contradicts their own previous publications on the topic.
Well, I'm just going to make this point. It doesn't contradict. It takes into account all these points, looks at the work that's been done, and the view of the experts is, far from making matters worse, would actually improve matters. That's the view. Now, can we move on to parking, which is the final point? And let's see if we can, hesitate to say this, deal with this briefly. But on the parking side of the equation, the only point I'm interested in asking you about is the planning policy side of the equation. So you'll know that there are local planning policy documents, the London Plan, Croydon Plan, etc., etc. And are you aware of the fact that on the parking number side of the equation, there are no mandatory requirements that you have to provide a certain number of spaces for a residential development?
Yes.
Thank you. And indeed, the encouragement which is given in local, by which I mean London-wide and indeed Croydon-wide, the encouragement there is given to reduce parking numbers, minimise, and in fact car-free developments are, as you will know, encouraged. You're aware of all of that. Thank you. Good. And you refer to a passage in national planning policy, paragraph 29 of the, to use a jargon, NPPF, at the top of the last page of your statement. So can we just look at that together? I don't know, do you have the NPPF there? Good. Yeah. Good.
Sadly, it is mine.
Shall I turn to paragraph 29?
Yeah, please, if you could, yeah.
Yep, I'm there.
And the sentence you've picked out is in paragraph 29, and this is a paragraph that's giving advice about transport policies. Do you see? Transport policies, the opening words, have an important role to play in facilitating sustainable development, but also in contributing to wider sustainability and health objectives. Smarter use of technologies can reduce the need to travel. Well, this is the sentence you've picked out. The transport system, I'm emphasising, needs to be balanced in favour of sustainable transport modes, giving people a real choice about how they travel, etc., etc. Now, just pausing there and just looking at what we're being told here. First of all, this is a paragraph which is talking about what should go into transport policies. Do you see? Thank you. Secondly, when it says the transport system, that's the system which enables one to move around, needs to be balanced in favour of sustainable transport modes, giving people a real choice. Sustainable transport modes, as you will know, mean trains, buses, bicycles, and one's feet, not cars.
Yes.
Do you understand that? So the advice here is advocating, when it says giving people a real choice about how they travel, it's advocating that the transport system needs to be balanced in favour of trains, buses, people who want to cycle, people who can and want to walk. And the real choice is giving people the choice to go on the train, to go on the bus, to cycle, to walk. Do you see? This is not a pro-car sentence. It's an anti-car sentence.
Well, I think the preceding...
Do you see?
Well, I think I'd accept that the first half of the sentence is, you might crudely characterise as anti-car. So I accept that the words, the transport system needs to be balanced in favour of sustainable transport modes. I accept that that is a sort of anti-car sentiment. However, the last 7 or 8 words, giving people a real choice about how they travel, I would interpret that part of the sentence to mean, well, as it says, there should be a choice. That is to say, people should have the choice as to whether they use the various sustainable transport modes that you just described, train, bus, walking, or a car. So I don't interpret that to be a choice within sustainable transport modes. I interpret that to mean a choice across all transport modes. But that is a matter of semantic definition, and it may well be that we disagree about the interpretation of that sentence.
Thank you. And then finally in that regard, are you aware, and you've obviously read the NPPF, are you aware that national policy doesn't seek to set any parking standards, for example, for residential development?
Yes, I'm aware.
It used to years ago, but it doesn't now.
Yes.
And it leaves that job to, well, in London, to the London plan, and then drilling down to the boroughs and so on.
Yes, or indeed to the planning inspector who adjudicates the call-in, yes.
Well, no, it doesn't leave it to the inspector who adjudicates the call-in, because parking standards and policies on parking are set out
the policies, yes. Yeah, of course,
the mayor and in Croydon by Croydon.
Yeah, no, I accept the policy is not determined by the inspector.
Good. Thanks. Well, we'll leave it there. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you.
Sorry to have kept you a lot longer than I had anticipated.
I'm afraid we're not quite done yet, Mr. Philp. Mr. Morgan is the counsel for the council. Do you have any questions?
Can I just I'm not on yet, sir, I don't think. Is that better? Can everyone hear me? Thank you very much. Sir, thank you. Mr. Philp, good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
So again, as for yesterday, I will adopt the answers given to my learned friend, and that covers all but just one short matter, if I may.
Please.
Mr. Philp, just help me. I know you had a long session, but you kindly cast your back a little bit. You were being asked about the emerging detailed plan. Do you remember? CLP2. Yes. I don't think you need to go to it yet, because I'm not going to ask you, I'm not going to go over what we've gone over. Just be clear, I think, and I understand entirely, it's not easy for you to remember all the things you've been involved in, but I think you accepted that you have been involved in objecting to DM44. And I think you actually, I can't remember whether you told us or not, I think you actually attended the examination back in May of last year, I think.
Yes, that's correct.
Thank you. I know you weren't and couldn't be here yesterday, but we heard yesterday how DM44 had evolved over a significant period of time, going back, for example, to 2013, where there was a version of the plan which was preferred and alternative options, and that contained a 14-storey block in there. I don't know whether you were aware of that.
I am, yes.
Right. And I know you didn't want to, nor did I actually, but for the record, I wonder if you'll help me just on one factual matter, because you didn't want to get involved in sort of the political machinations, and that's quite right. It's the planning aspects that the Inspector and the Secretary of State will be interested in. But you did use the phrase that the policy, I think DM44 and the tall building, were rammed through by the Labour group. Do you remember that?
Yes.
Those were your words, I think.
That was, of course, in relation to the 2017 detailed plan. I made no comment, as you recall, on the 2012 or 2013 version.
You didn't. Just because some of the written representations raise this sort of political point. And just for the record, it is right, isn't it, that at the time of the 2013 proposal in the emerging plan, that was then a Conservative group that were in control of Croydon.
That is the case, but it's also the case that at no point did the Conservative-controlled administration ever grant a consent on this site for more than, I think, 8 stories.
No, but they were in control at the time of the 2013 document, correct?
Well, I was only elected in 2015, so I'm not that familiar with the sort of processes before then, but that could well be true.
Thank you very much. That's all I wanted to ask you, Mr. Philp. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Is there anyone who's going to speak in support of the proposals who wishes to ask a question? Okay, and it's just my last few questions, please, Mr. Philp. Mr. Cunningham, who's here from the developer,
Yes.
says that your supporters appear to be mature people, probably homeowners, not younger people wanting to get onto the housing ladder. Do you think that's a fair characterisation?
Well, firstly, I'm not quite sure why someone's age or other personal characteristics have any bearing on the relevance of their opinions in planning matters.
I think, just to clarify then, I think his point was the homeowners bit. I think he was getting at mature people are more likely to be.
Well, I mean, I have not conducted a demographic analysis of the 11,000 people who replied. However, knowing the area as I do, I would expect those 11,000 local people to cover the whole spectrum of ages, genders, and home-owning tenures. And I think Mr. Cunningham's assertions are just that, assertions. I presume unsubstantiated by any factual background or backup.
Well, that's what I've asked you, so
Yes.
that I can the same
Yes.
question the other way round. I think you've sort of covered this in evidence, but I'll just clarify. You talked about it being a peaceful suburban area. Now, did you mostly mean noise, or did you mean other things?
No, I mean, clearly there is a, relatively busy junction there. No, when I said peaceful, I meant it more holistically. By peaceful, I meant its sort of character, the feel of the place, the atmosphere, what it feels like to live here, and it is a suburban environment. I know there's a busy junction there. Obviously, we can all see it. But when I said peaceful, I meant the character and the feel of the place. And my feeling, I think the feeling of the vast majority of local people, is that a development, this particular development, with its scale, in its particular location, would damage, and in fact may even destroy that peaceful character. But the word peaceful wasn't intended to be a specific noise point, it was a more general, holistic comment.
Thank you. My final question, you'll be very pleased to hear. You complain about the lack of parking. If more parking were provided, then presumably there would be less housing and less affordable housing in the scheme. Do you consider, and should I report to the Secretary of State, that you consider that you say parking is a higher priority than affordable housing?
Well, I think that would be to mischaracterise
that's why I'm putting it
my
to you.
views. So no, I would not say that to Sajid, Javid, or indeed anyone else. Look, clearly the balance between affordable housing, parking, Section 106 payments, the height of the building, etc., it is a matter of commercial appraisal, and how those things get traded off is a commercial matter for the developer. Of course, the other element in that trade-off is the developer's profit. So it is a multi-dimensional sort of moving part. I would make 2 points. I would say it would be much better, if you were going to build something of this size, it should have decent parking provision. The council's own estimate is that it requires 165 spaces. How you provide those, do you dig down? I mean, that's a matter for architects and for the appraisal. But secondly, and more importantly, my general view is that this site should support a smaller building, for example, 7 floors. And of course, if you only had 7 floors, you would only need probably 50 or 60 car parking spaces, and there would be fewer vehicle movement. So really the solution to all of this, all these parking issues, really is just to build a building that is in keeping with the local area, and that would diminish the magnitude of the parking and traffic movement issues.
Thank you very much, Mr. Philp, and for finding time to come here today.
It's my pleasure. Thank you, Mr.
Thank you. Right, it's now 20 to 1. I think we probably need a bit of shuffling of papers and so on and so forth before we hear from the applicants' witnesses. So I'll take an early lunch and we'll adjourn until 20 to 2. The inquiry is adjourned.